saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the view of Wolfpack Research or any of its officers. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on this program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. We are not investment advisors. We hold no registrations with the SEC, FINRA, or any other regulatory agency, and none of the opinions expressed on this podcast should be considered investment advice. The listener should assume that we have positions in and stand to benefit from any stock or other security mentioned on this podcast. Do your own research before making investment decisions.
Welcome to the Wolf Den, everybody. This is Dan David. I'm here with the pack. Joining us today is Carl, our sound engineer. God help us all. Carl is very excited about this interview. For the first time, I think he's more excited than I am to interview somebody, because we are interviewing the OGs of the OGs for short selling, Kurt Feshbach. How are you, Kurt?
I'm good. Thanks, Dan. What a nice introduction.
Well, it couldn't be a truer introduction. I mean, Kurt Feshbach and his brothers started what we refer to as short activism in 1982. That is almost 40 years ago, and he has a lot to talk about dating 40 years. All of us that are waxing poetic today over the last 5, 10, 2 years can thank, in part, the Feshbach Brothers and a few others like them. But since Kurt's here today, thank you, Kurt.
Well, you're welcome. And I don't want to leave out our other partner, Dan. Tom Barton was very much at Feshbach, part of Feshbach Brothers from the beginning. And he was a brilliant guy, or is a brilliant guy, still out there. And so it was really the four of us plus we had an incredible team of analysts and whatever. I mean, we probably had the greatest team ever, honestly.
Yeah, you guys, I've heard from other shorts who have been in the game much longer than myself that you guys had a dream team. You were absolutely fantastic. And for anybody listening, I'm just going to give you some of the greatest hits you might have heard of. ZZZBest, that was the Feshbach Brothers. Prison sentences, because there was no real business. Memory Metal, prison sentences, because there were no real contracts. Big O Tires, prison sentences for stock manipulation on the part of the company they covered. Sunrise SNL, prison sentences, accounting fraud. Y&A Group, CEO vanished, Chapter 11. We're not going to get into that. CGHI, bogus inventory stock manipulation, Chapter 11. Veritech, no AIDS cure. Turns out there isn't one. Consent decree. Bank of New England, heard of that one? Fraudulent accounting, FDIC seizure. There were a few in on that one, I'll give that. Flexible computer, scam product, consent decree. York Research, bogus revenue, SEC investigation. Cannon Group, bogus accounting, consent decree. And Kronar, bogus accounting, Chapter 11. That's just a few of them. Kurt and his brothers. I have a memo here dated 1991, and it's in typewriter format. The Feshbach Brothers are committed to promoting honesty in the stock market by detecting and eliminating fraud. We routinely investigate situations where we find public being deceived by unethical financial reporting. Our research is thorough and professional. We have the facts, and we make the facts available to the proper authorities. It is unlikely that there is anyone in the last decade, that would be from 1982 to 1991, I assume, that's detected more securities fraud than the Feshbach Brothers. This is an achievement has greatly benefited the general investing public. We find in general that the only individuals who are upset by our actions are those who tolerate and sympathize with unethical corporate activity. That was for you, you Twitter trolls and tumors. We intend to expand our activities as we believe the public expects and deserves honesty in the market. A decade of success has proven to us and our investors that honesty pays and pays well. Wow. Boom. All right, Kurt. So let's get started from the beginning. You have an illustrious educational background. You dropped out of high school and you went into the diamond merchant business or diamond broker business. And from there, you became one of the most infamous short-side researchers in history. Tell us about it.
Sure. So I stopped the diamond business in about 1981, 82, and was my dad worked with a bunch of oil companies out of Midland, Texas. It was, pretty hot time right after all the oil embargoes, and a bunch of these companies were pretty good. I found a few that weren't so good, but didn't really realize it because I'd never knew how to read a balance sheet or an income statement. I ended up meeting a guy. My dad introduced me to a guy named Rusty Rose, who was probably the most brilliant.
Was he a big-time wrestler?
Rusty Rose? No, Rusty Rose. He went to Stanford. Stanford Business School. He was a Harvard graduate. He was absolutely a brilliant guy and very nice. And he really became a mentor to me. So thinking about, I was 28, 29. He was probably 10 years older, but he was really the one that got me started down this road. I was talking about a couple of companies, and he was kind of making fun of me, honestly, because I was trying to promote these stocks, not really knowing what I was doing, didn't have any education, and the companies were paying.
Kurt, at that point, you were on the side of, because I think your father was in PR, right? Public relations. And you were on the side of maybe
did deals in PR.
Yeah. And you were on the side of promoting these companies. And you went into Rusty Rhodes from WWF fame, I'm sure.
Rose. ROSC. Yep.
Even better. And you were pitching this stuff on the long side, and he was basically laughing at you.
Completely laughing at me.
Okay.
Making fun of me.
Okay. How did you take that?
He was also, well, I was embarrassed, right? Because I was just embarrassed because I didn't really know what I was talking about. Uh-huh. And then he kind of sat me down.
That never embarrasses Carl, but go ahead. I'm sorry. He shot you down, yeah.
So he sits me down, and I'm talking about a company out of Midland, Texas called Ike Lovelady. And they've got oil wells and some drilling and some acreage and this and that. And he sits me down, he pulls up the balance sheet, and he says, look, Kurt, he says, this thing's got, a $100 million market cap, and it's got $100 million supposedly of oil reserves and acreage, but it's got $100 million worth of debt. So he said, what's it really worth? Well, that was simple math for a high school dropout.
Yeah.
And, it was zero, obviously, and eventually the stock went to zero.
I would submit, Kurt, well, first of all, $100 million market cap in the early 80s was not tiny back then, by the way, like it is now. But I would submit that your first clue could have been the name of the company was Ike Lovelady.
Well, it was a man. Ike Lovelady was a person.
Okay,
and
I don't care. Wow.
He was a funny guy. He chewed cigars. Okay. But what would happen would be you would watch him chewing these cigars, Dan.
Yeah.
And he literally would swallow them.
Yeah.
He would start with these $2 cigars or $1 cigars. I don't know what they cost, but he would start chewing them, and they would start to disappear if you were with him for more than 30 minutes.
Well,
the cigar would eventually go away.
I would be willing to bet that this guy's oral fixation killed him.
It could have, for sure.
Yeah,
I don't remember or know how he died.
Well, the science is in. That was not good for you. Okay, so Ike Lovelady was was the first one you were pitching, and yeah, it sounds like your Rusty guy was right. He's simple math. I mean, this is bad, and that kind of sent you back thinking about the math. I see here that it's been reported around 1981 you stumbled on your first short target, and it was the idea for a business, and that first short target was Universal Energy, an oil and gas company with a market value of $45 million, and you made about $5,000 on that when it fell from $8 to $2. So I got a couple questions. How did you fall onto this short target? What was the conversation like with your dad, who was in PR for companies like this? And then lastly, what'd you do with your $5,000?
Well, probably we'll start with the last thing. Probably $5,000 felt like $5 million.
Yeah.
And so, it would have been a lot of money for me at the time, for sure. And my dad didn't actually care about the short selling. He sort of encouraged it, and he knew Rusty well enough to know that if he was helping me, that we were on a path. So we found this, and I mean, it kind of started with a trip to. I was managing some money for a friend of mine, and he was paying me 20% of his profits. We shorted Universal. That was the first one. There was many. I've really forgotten some of these. I'll have forgotten some of these names, but it was traded. It was an over-the-counter stock, of course, but eventually that stock fell into the pink sheets, and it stayed in the pink sheets, trading between 2 and 4 for probably a decade. And we probably stayed shorted till it eventually went broke. But I used that $5,000, and I used that win, and I went to I met a guy in Atlanta who wanted to give me some money, and then he introduced me to a few other guys, and I went to Atlanta that year, and it was maybe 81 or 82, and raised like $200,000, and called my brother Matt and said, "Matt, we've got a business here. we could if we can double this." Shorting oil and gas companies, just shorting stocks, right? I was like, we have a business here, and we could make, we could probably make 40 or 50,000 a year each if we can just be up a certain amount of money and making 20% of the profits. Well, on 200,000, we would have had to been up 100%, but that's kind of how it started. So I got this money. It was all in individual accounts. We used a broker down in San Diego. His name was Rich Feld, wonderful guy. He helped set things up for us, and that's kind of how we got it going. Then we just kept meeting people, and they kept giving us money, and we finally, put together a fund, and we were collaborating with. It was Matt. It was really Matt and I at the beginning. And then a year or two later, Joe joined us. I want to say around 84, 85, but we were already talking to Tom Barton, and his brother, I think, was probably working with him then as well.
Matt and Joe are both your brothers.
Correct. Sorry. Okay. Matt and Joe are my brothers.
Yeah. Okay.
Tom is the non-Feshbach.
Okay. All right. So you got the two brothers into it. You started it. You were even the OG of the brothers. So, and you talked to them about, hey, we can make $50,000 a year if we just raise a couple $100,000 or so, and off the 20%. You grew this thing, you and your brothers, to $1 billion fund in the early 1990s, when $1 billion was a lot of money.
Well, yeah, we did. We grew it. It was remarkable. I mean, the due diligence process and things that the funds used at that point, the fund of funds and universities and and the different people that gave us money was not like what it is today. It wasn't, 6 months, 50-page checklist. I mean, we would get, by 1984, 85, we just were having so much success in so many different types of names. We were short something called American Solar King, which was just a solar company, but it was, it was a fraud. I don't remember what happened to it, but it was not economical. And there was another one that did waste to energy, Jiffy Industries, it was called. But it was, waste to energy. It was, literally human waste to energy, and none of the companies were economic. And Cronar was another solar one. That was one on the list that you read, and that was a solar company. So we went from, kind of all these oil and gas things to solar energy, and then eventually into S&Ls. But back to what I was saying was, back then, people would get our wire instruction to just wire money, and then we'd send them documents afterwards.
After you got the money,
they'd literally want to be in at the end of the month or the end of the quarter.
Wow.
It was crazy.
Wow. Well, that must be what it's like to be, some of these big funds today, like, I don't know, something that reminds me of Schmark Invest. But they're, and talking about your due diligence, because let's get into that for a second. And what you did, and you brought up checklist. I have a document here that is a Feshbach analyst hat, research director hat, or portfolio manager hat. And this is the Feshbach checklist for anybody wearing those hats. And it's 22 points on this checklist with, some sub points going A to F in some cases, that you would have your analysts fill out and hand you before you talk to them about a stock. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah. This is a fantastic archival instrument that is used today, probably not in the same format. Kurt, I would love to be able to post this document with our podcast. Would you allow me to do that?
Oh, please. Absolutely.
I think this is fantastic, and everybody should have it, frame it, put it up if you're short, or if you've gone up against one of our shorts. So tell me about the process. Once you got this in, what was your process like? Because as Carl was reminding me today, this was before Al Gore invented the internet. So that being the case, information dissemination was incredibly hard. And most of the short sellers from your time went through reporters and other means. How did you do it?
Well, we would always start with the SEC, the DOJ, any FDA, FTC. We started there, and then there was always, we would look for.
You say
we spent a lot of time with.
Kurt, you say you started there. Okay, people listening to this are like, oh yeah, right. Well, they just they got on Google and they started looking at the SEC archives, and they started looking at DOJ archive. How did you get this information in 1982, 83, 84?
How did we get it?
Yeah.
You mean like how did we do due diligence back then?
Well, how did you get it from the SEC, from the DOJ? I mean, the process.
Oh, okay. So, all right. Well, so there's two flows here, right? There's the getting the SEC documents. There was a firm called Disclosure, but for a number of years, we literally would have somebody sitting at the SEC office all day. We paid him, whatever we were paying back then. He would sit there all day, and we would wait for documents to come in, and then he would take them and fax them to us. We were if you can believe this, we were probably the first. I mean, this is, again, data moves fast now, but back then this was pretty innovative. We were the only hedge fund that we knew of. I mean, obviously somebody else may have had one, but we were the only hedge fund for a long time with a fax machine.
Yeah.
And we would get we would get guys to get fax machines so they could send us documents.
That thermal paper, right? That would come through and turn black after a week. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first paper. We also had dial phones back then, I think.
Did you?
You had to dial a phone number.
You guys didn't just like pick up a phone and hit the receiver a couple times and an operator named Peggy picked up?
The party line.
Only on conference calls. You had to call AT&T or Pacific Bell or whoever was around back then to set up a conference call if you wanted to have one.
Oh my God.
Wow. That is an incredible process. I'm still trying to absorb that people like myself or whoever else think they're really doing due diligence. And in your time, you had to pay a guy to sit outside the office of the SEC and like look at everybody with puppy dog eyes and say, "You got something for me?"
It was kind of like that, but I think, Dan, I think you and several other people have really proven how to do due diligence. And
not back then.
It's well, back then it was different. I mean, it was just different, and finding sources. I mean, we had a whole wall of just phone books.
Yeah.
To try and find,
wow.
if we were short some boot company, and we were trying to figure out there was supposed to be a deal on it, but it was the kind of time where you could do this kind of thing anyway. Called the office, asked for the CEO. Secretary said CEO's at this restaurant, and called the restaurant to see if he was really there. Talked to a waitress. True story.
All right, go ahead. I'm sorry. That's great.
Try to get the mood of the meeting, right? She doesn't know what they're saying, but they left angry. So we figured the deal was not done, and you could do that.
So, okay, you call the secretary being like, this is what they did back then. Oh no, he's down at Susie's Cafe, and you call Susie's Cafe and you say, "Hey, Susie, can you page Michael Hunt?" And she does, and you go from there, and they're all pissed off, right?
Yeah, but it wasn't even like that. It was a little coffee shop, so Susie knew who Michael Hunt was, and hey, is Michael there? Yeah, he's having lunch, and how's he doing? I was trying to reach him, and she said, well, the lunch is about over, and they all look kind of upset. And I said, thanks, Susie, and off we went. So.
I love how you're not picking up on my paging Mike Hunt.
They didn't have pagers then.
No, but
pagers didn't come till later.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
I mean, just talking about the work you'd have to do for executive background now. I mean, then to now.
Yeah. No, tell us that. Yeah, tell us. How did you do? Because on your checklist is definitely, everything you need to know about an executive and their background, whether it's there have been any arrests or they've had any run-ins with the SEC or DOJ. How did you do that? How long was that process at times? I mean, did it take months for one person?
No, I would say not months, but definitely days, sometimes months. But, we had contacts, and, Tom and Matt and Joe and I, we learned how to just dig and pull strings and look for whatever we could look for. I mean, it was really one thing after, one thing led to a question, led to another question. And, you learned how to check police records, or you learned how to check, local court documents, but it was all by hand, right? Like now, if we need to look at court documents, you can go to Pacer, or you can, if it's not in Pacer, it's going to be in the local courts, and you still have to do that by hand. Like, and what I mean by hand is you can look him up online, but you have to go to, Orange County, Florida, to look at whatever's there about some company, or West Palm Beach and whatever their local court would be, or Santa Clara County, because things are not always right out in front of you even today, right?
No, yeah.
You can check things that way. You maybe get some story about some beef somebody has, and you check a court to see court. You can get police records and see what's happened. But back then it was. I mean, and that's why I say we had such an incredible team of, my brothers and myself and Tom and all of our analysts. No one ever gave up and said it was a dead end until they were sure.
Yeah. Well, that's good advice for today too.
Yeah. I mean, look, you guys, I'm sure you guys think you run into dead ends, and they're just not dead ends. I mean, you've got to take it down until you're 100% positive that there's nothing there. So I think, in terms of checking people, sometimes it would take weeks or months, or sometimes you would run into an industry expert who knew, and this is before, you had the expert calls, right? There were no expert networks back then. So this is just another story, but we were short a company. We ended up short a company called Ultra Systems, and they had wood-fired power plants, or a wood-fired power plant. I don't remember how many they really had, but it was in Central California, and I couldn't find out much about it. It was too far to drive, and you couldn't go out every day. And I just picked up the phone book for that area and found somebody who lived right behind it. It came, I got to talking to him and told him what I needed, and paid him some money, and they'd call me. And what would happen would be, with this wood, it would combust. Like the wood would get hot and start a fire. So they would start losing wood, because they had these big piles of wood.
As wood does.
Yeah.
As wood does. And she called me like every week or so. And then, but what eventually did them in was all the truckers figured out where they needed wood, and they started charging them double and triple to bring the wood in. So we were talking to truckers. I was talking to the neighbor, and the plant was just not economical. Mm-hmm. So, but that's what the phone books were for. We're to call, you look on Google Maps now next to some business, and you might call the businesses around it to see what's happening. Back then we had phone books.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've heard of phone books. I
yeah.
actually remember those. I remember like 2007, somebody coming to our office trying to sell us an ad in the phone book.
Yeah. Yellow Pages.
So I think the guy quit that job and went to work for Google. I'm sure.
Pretty much.
Yeah. The phone book was a big deal, and that's where you got a lot of information that we now take for granted in Google. And yeah, you run it down. So tell me about like some of the more famous things. I mean, arguably one of the most famous things, because Barry Minkow is Barry Minkow, and he's a douche. Though, Barry, if you're listening, I would love to have you on my show. ZZZBest. By the way, it was the best that he had to star in his own movie. That was Barry. That was awesome. So take us through ZZZBest, because in the movie starring Barry Minkow, about Barry Minkow, he doesn't mention you guys, but you guys brought them down.
Yes. Well, and it was ZZZBest was, we used to have, each of us had different stocks that we worked on, and the analysts, of course, also did. But ZZZBest was really one of Tom's stocks, and we all worked on it. But he found it. I don't really remember how he found it, but basically what it turned out was, Barry was out. He was like 19 or 20 or 21. I mean, he was pretty young. Yeah. And he was telling people about all these contracts and how big they were. And there was a flood or a fire, something in MGM in Las Vegas was one. There was something else in Sacramento. And he was talking about how big these contracts were.
And ZZZBest, we should tell people, ZZZBest, for people who don't know, started out doing cleanup. Like, I mean, they would clean offices, but they would also, their bread and butter was when you had a flood or fire or partial fire or something like that, they would go in and get a contract to clean that up. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead. Tell us.
So those contracts, those contracts, they were telling people they were 10, 20, 30 million bucks. But if you called and just check with the hotels or the office buildings, you will find out they were 2 or 3 million bucks. And then the other thing they would do is they would bring, and this will sound familiar, in some ways, but they would bring investment bankers or people they want, when they were doing road shows or stock promotions, they would bring people to, burnt out buildings and places like that. They would have shown up early and hung up, some of their ZZZBest, their hats and different work things in a truck or two, I suppose. And they wouldn't even have the contract. It was similar to, sprinkling. What was that? There was a gold company that we weren't, in fact, involved in back in I want to say in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, where the guys were sprinkling gold on the ground to get investors to realize it was just so easy to pick up and it was going to be a great gold mining thing.
It's literally everywhere. Look, it's.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that there's progress in the world, and part of that is how much more information we have for doing due diligence so that things like this shouldn't happen. But one thing that never seems to change, our investment bankers can show up to some staged event and be like, man, can I sell this thing? I'm going to have them lining up for a pipe deal, for a private placement, for whatever. Let's make sure we don't get there before they set up the show. And they did it 30 years ago, and they're doing it today.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent.
You're right.
I just hate bankers.
No, but that was the point. They did it 30, 40 years ago. They're doing it today.
Mm-hmm.
So same thing. We were short. This was one that wasn't on the list. We were short a company called Uni Oil back then, not to have it confused with Union Oil, but that was sort of what we always thought they were trying to do. And it was run by a guy named Lloyd Richards, and he was making these announcements, and we were reading about them. When you went back through like 10 of their announcements, they had almost as much production as pick an oil company, Shell,
Standard Oil,
or Chevron or whoever. They literally, there was a company back then that you probably never heard of called Kerr-McGee that was producing maybe 30 or 40,000 barrels a day. These guys, based on what they had announced, were doing like 30,000 barrels a day.
Wow.
And I mean, it was like incredible. So what we did was we hired a landman to verify all of these wells that these guys supposedly had, and these brokerage firms were writing reports on. And they went to Denver, where you have to actually file, and I assume it's the same, and maybe you can get them online, but you actually have to file your ownership of an oil well, whatever the public domain was for oil wells. And so we hired a guy who was familiar with it. He went through all of their wells and all of the areas around their wells, and it turned out like literally they owned zero oil and gas.
Wow.
Zero.
How big of a short was that for you? Do you remember?
Oh, it was big. We were short a few hundred, couple 100,000 shares, few 100,000 shares. It was big. We made big money on it. Back then, millions of bucks, and for our investors in our fund. And it was, I think it was around 1985 or 86. I mean, it was like
that's a lot of money.
Remarkable. Lloyd Richards eventually went to jail.
Like a lot of people you went up against.
Yeah. We put a lot of guys in jail. I mean,
they don't go to jail.
We put a lot of guys in jail.
Yeah, not anybody from China, I can assure you that.
No one from China goes to jail, do they?
No, they do not. Well, you do in China if you do something against a Chinese citizen, but you don't in China if you do something against an American citizen. That's pretty okay. So your investors were thrilled. You guys were kind of living the high life. I'd read some articles where you guys were kooky zany, like you had gumball machines and pinball machines in your office, and you had like 100 teddy bears in there, I assume, because of the bear thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you were one of the first. You had swag. You had fraud buster swag. Like, what were they? They were bags or hats or
jackets, watches.
And watches.
Jackets, watches, coffee cups. I wish I still had some.
And it was all fraud buster stuff.
All had fraud buster.
You don't have any of that stuff left?
I really don't. It's embarrassing. I've got a coffee cup, I think, at home, but it's I don't know what happened. A lot of that stuff. I mean, when we anyway, it was we had a lot. And it was fun, and we sent it out, and people loved having it.
I will trade you a North Face Wolfpack Research hoodie and North Face Wolfpack Research winter jacket for one used mug.
Okay, if I can get a mug, I'll get it for you.
Fair enough. There you
we'll
go.
find one.
That would be awesome, and I'd love to have a picture of that too, because, like, yeah, man, that's kind of the first stuff, and I bet your investors just loved getting it, right? Not as much as they love getting the returns, but they probably loved it.
They loved it. We were people liked us. Our investors loved us, and of course, the guys that ran the frauds. It's very similar to today. Congressional hearings and short selling, and it's terrible. And
really, so you had congressional hearings back in the 80s about how terrible short sellers were?
It's either in the late 80s or early 90s. Yeah, there was like a whole thing about short selling. It was same BS, same stuff. Back then it was there was a guy that had a over-the-counter type newsletter called Robert Flaherty. He constantly promoted frauds in his thing. Do you know that name?
Well, it comes up in relation to the Feshbach Brothers. This is going to be a shocking revelation to you. He was not a fan. He alleged you guys of all kinds of dirty tricks and said negative campaigns by short sellers have occasionally damaged startup companies that otherwise might have thrived. I assume he means frauds that he might have gotten paid from. I don't know. That's just an opinion, because I think Flaherty's still in business doing some kind of shit today, right?
Is he? I don't know. I lost track of him, honestly.
Carl, what do you have on your detective meter, Carl?
Flaherty International Publishing. He still has something active, but I haven't been able to find the actual publication, so it must be like an insider thing.
What's his first name?
Robert Flaherty.
Robert Flaherty. Okay. Kiss my ass, Robert, just so you know. All right, let's move on. So you had your share of people who felt like, what do they say now? You're crying fire in a crowded theater. I always ask the lawyer who says that, what happens when the theater's on fire and you're saying fire? Is that okay?
Financial terrorist. That was a good
one.
Oh,
yeah. Financial terrorist. I get called that a lot.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, we had, we've got, I'll have to go through it, Dan, and see if I can find a bunch more names, but there's 50 other names, probably, or 30 other names of companies that, either went bankrupt or just guys went to jail. I mean, we were short American Continental, which was Keating's bank.
Oh, Keating, right. The savings and loan guy who was kind of attached to the late Senator McCain. I mean, in all fairness, yeah. I did love John McCain, but early on in his career, he got a little attached to Keating, as well as I think Neil Bush, right? Some of those guys.
Could have been. I actually don't remember. I remember when Keating went to jail, when we were all pretty happy that he got convicted of fraud.
Yeah.
Bank fraud and went to federal prison. So it was a big group effort, those banks, and we were short that one. You mentioned Sunrise, I think, is on here.
Yeah.
Sunrise is a funny story. My brother actually was visiting the main branch in Florida over, I think it was in Boca or somewhere. And the day he was visiting was actually the day they got raided by the FBI and the feds.
Kidding. Did he actually see Neil Bush shit his pants?
He might have. I don't know.
Daddy. Somebody come help me. Wow.
I have to say, I found it interesting in kind of doing some of the research on you, Kurt, because Dan has been doing this forever, and I just run a soundboard.
Shut up.
That there were so many articles where they accused you of unorthodox methods or doing things that were outside the norm, and when you really read through it, it was just simple things like calling the customer and seeing if they actually had a contract or verifying that they own the land grant, and that was considered unorthodox. It just blows my mind where that's kind of like SOP at this point.
Well, it got to be SOP back then even. I mean, I think, but you're right. I mean, it was unorthodox and we were crazy and we did crazy things and,
You guys you dug through trash too, right? Like you dug through companies' trash.
Yeah, when it was legal. It's not always particularly legal, but yeah, we would dig through companies' trash. I did that for somebody on a stock not even that long ago. I had a PI up in Canada, and he was digging through some company's trash that was put out on the curb, and it was legal to go through it.
Uh-huh.
He would take it out, put new trash in, so in case somebody came by and why is the trash can empty, and went back and we found.
Wow, well that's thorough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
so
I mean,
there's ways to go through trash.
Did you ever take shredded documents and try and put them together?
I don't think so. I don't remember that.
Okay,
that would be pretty rough.
That's pretty urban legend. You see that in the movies, but like. Yeah, you see shredded documents and you're like, yeah, this is probably an easier way to do this.
That's a puzzle you can't really get to.
Yeah, I think there was something about ZZZBest, somebody going through ZZZBest trash and getting some stuff on them, but that guy. I'm
sure that I don't actually remember, but I don't remember whether I'm sure, look, we went through people's trash. We went through company trash. We had PIs. We did a ton of work that way. I mean, especially, there was no internet. So you had to send somebody to locations
right
whenever you could. I mean,
right. And there had to be something written on documents, rather than online.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You couldn't find, now you can find most everything online.
I've never done the trash thing. I've never had anybody go through the trash. I guess in the 80s and 90s, like, you got to do what you got to do. I can't say that if it was in the 80s and 90s, I wouldn't have done it. I just think today, with so much stuff online, there's just not as much paper or whatever. And then if it's a person's house or whatever, that's just completely off. So once you got the information, you then really, had to go through, I guess, reporters. Like one of the things on your checklist, I found interesting, is it says point number, where is this? 15. The short story is worthy of the Wall Street Journal heard on the street column, ?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something they had to turn into you with their little short write-up thesis. So I assume that you would contact the Wall Street Journal. It's been written that you contacted Herb Greenberg at the San Francisco Chronicle, and Herb's been a guest on our show. Herb's a friend, a really great guy. And Herb's quote on this was, the SEC queried him about the Feshbach relationship with columnists such as yourself. And Greenberg and other columnists routinely quote that the Feshbachs, some critics, such as Flaherty, say shorts use reporters to help drive down stocks. Greenberg said, any writing about stocks is open to such charges. We get used by people all around who try to use us for good stories. He said that's shorts and they're no different from longs. That's absolutely true. because by the time he publishes it, it's on him to do his diligence, and he did. But you develop these relationships, I guess, with these people.
Yes, we would. I mean, we had a great relationship with Herb, you know, and he's a great guy, like you said, and fun to speak to. And, you know, we had Dan Dorfman. We even had, what was the guy's name? We used to talk to the guy from the Journal. They actually got busted for taking money from people to promote their stocks. I can't think of his name all of a sudden.
Rupert Murdoch?
No.
Okay.
It was Herb would remember, but there was a guy at the Journal. I had a relationship with Gary Putka, who used to write Heard on the Street back then, and he wrote with another guy. And I'll think of the name, maybe, I hope. But
all right. Well, while you're thinking of the name, let's talk about the process a little bit, because it wasn't like,
sure,
it wasn't anything like, hey, I've got, you know, these 5 points or this write-up. I'm going to give it to you. You're going to publish it. Tell me what day you're going to publish it. Like, none of that happened. They could not tell you whether they were going to publish or not. And they basically asked questions. You answered them. Is that that's how I understand the relationship worked?
Yeah. I mean, we would never know if they were going to publish or if they were or when they were, for sure. We would present, you know, the facts as we saw them.
Right.
And we would write and we would send it in a package. And by the mid 80s, and we were using FedEx, right? So we would FedEx things we couldn't, you know, we wouldn't stick it in the mail because it took too long, but we would FedEx stuff and they would have to go and, you know, we would try and provide, sources for them to verify, and they would develop their own as well. And that's how a story would get published. And if they didn't find it newsworthy, which is why it's in here the way it is in the checklist, they wouldn't publish. So, you know, it wasn't based on rumors or innuendo or anything. It was based on, you know, we went to the land office in Denver, and Unioil doesn't own any oil wells. Mm-hmm. They have no oil. Mm-hmm. And here's the proof.
Right. And it's up to that reporter to recreate it. Not unlike, you know, somebody will call me and say, hey, I've got this company's a complete fraud. And of course, whatever you see from this person just says fraud, fraud, fraud everywhere. And it's all probably innuendo and nothing's proven. But you've got to go in and speaking for myself, I don't know what everybody else does, go in and recreate it, or it doesn't exist. It does not exist in the vacuum that somebody says, I did this research, so take it. Was that the same way for you guys?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. Any reporter would have to go through it and look at it.
It was the same way for you too, right? Like, I mean, anything somebody sent you, you didn't just like pass it on to a reporter. You had to. Did you vet it yourself? I mean, I would think you did, but tell me.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah, we vetted everything. I mean, we would get calls from brokers with stock ideas and, you know, symbols and what they did and where they were from. And, you know, it was a much different time again, you know, but, you know, many of the things we did back then, you know, you guys do now, I do now, but yeah, we would get a name and get a story and we'd have to vet it 100%.
We don't do quite the same thing. I mean, the background work is all the same, right? And, you know, arguably you're still one of the best out there, but you don't publish. And maybe I'll take the time now to talk about, like, you've got this new business, the Bindle Paper, right? And you're doing this research for clients, I guess for under $1 billion, it's $37,000 a year. And you plan on publishing or writing about 8 to 12 initiations per year that you would provide to paying clients.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's bigger companies, definitely not what, you know, definitely different than what you're doing. Not that you don't do big companies. I don't mean it like that, but you know, you do publish. I don't.
I do them all.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a little. It's we don't do the exact same thing, of course, but it's much different than what we did in the '80s. We back then, we had D.H. Blair, you had Stratton Oakmont, you had Jordan Belfort or whatever his name was. You had a bunch of guys like that back then. So it's different, right? For sure. Now you guys are amazing with what you do with the Chinese companies and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me how much you guys dig in and get.
I don't know. I think you're still doing that. I know you are on some pretty big levels. You're just not public about it outside your exclusive clientele, which is your business model, and that's great. I would say this, and I mean, it's rhetorical, right? This is just my opinion. You're in a tough business, pal. I remember my former businesses. That's what we wanted to do. I never wanted to be a short seller. I hated the concept of betting against companies. It seemed like you're betting against the American dream. You're betting for something to fail rather than for something to succeed. I've since embraced that wholeheartedly with a big hug, but that model of selling just differentiated great research, the banks don't want it. Right. So if you think they're a client, they're not a client, because as a bank once told me, you want us to pay you to tell us one of our clients a fraud, meaning we can't collect fees from them anymore. How about you get out of my office? The funds, you would think that big funds who have big budgets would be happy to pay what would you think would be nothing, 37 grand a year to 100 grand a year, whatever. I mean, a fraction of what they probably pay on Bloomberg terminals, which only gives them the same information everybody else has on a Bloomberg terminal. But it's really tough to get these clients to pay. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, they definitely hate paying. People hate to pay for research. I mean, it's like...
That was a big setup on my part for you to be like, yeah, of course.
They hate to pay for research. Funds hate to pay for research. I don't really understand why.
Yeah, I mean, it's, hey, can you have one of your guys in China go check out 5 locations in 5 different provinces? And, we're a $10 billion fund, but we will pay you as much as $9,000. What do you think?
Pretty much. That's kind of how it went.
Right. Their whole attitude is, we're a big fund and we have Bloomberg and we have LexisNexis and then there's that Google machine and we'll figure it out without you if you're not going to take our $9 grand. And then you provide somebody, or I'll publish for my own research that's completely differentiated. It proves frauds. And they're like, how could we have known?
It's true. I mean, that really is kind of how that ended up going. I mean, I did some work in China on, I think we may have talked about this, Dan, and I'll tell you, this isn't that long ago, right? On Hanergy.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And
oh, man, they killed everybody.
Yeah, they killed everybody. Like, the stock went up and up and up.
Yeah.
But in the end, we had a guy who and I was doing some work in China then, but who was able to get a good view of one of their factories.
Uh-huh.
He went around, like, it was actually incredible. So we were, we could see the gate where stuff came in and out of, and nothing was ever happening.
Right.
That was one thing. That was a pretty big indicator. Then prior to that gate, he went and traveled to all the sites they were supposed to have construction going, and most of it was just raw land, overgrown, and stuff like that. We presented all these pictures, and in the end, I don't know whether the fund made money or not, but it was an incredible job.
I would say not on Hanergy. I mean, I think we did talk about Hanergy. I didn't do the work on Hanergy at my last company, and I don't sell research. Wolfpack doesn't do that, your model, at all. Geo Investing did have a model where we sold research, and people would call me and say, have you looked at Hanergy? And I was like, look, man, you're like the 100th person that's called me, which means that, Feshbach and everybody else is looking at Hanergy, and I don't feel like all of us need to be bumping each other in the bushes. So it's going to be somebody else's problem. And this fund was like really short. And the stock ripped. I mean, put them out of business completely. And when Hanergy finally fell apart because they were a fraud, he calls me and tells me he was right. And I was just like, yeah, but you're broke. But I was right. Yeah, but you're broke. Because being right isn't enough. You have to be right when the rest of the market agrees with you. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter financially.
100%. I mean, that's really, in the end, one of the, big issues of short selling, right? Like you can be right. And, you can end up in some stock that goes up 10 times before it goes down, even though the plant's not really operating, they're not really building, whatever, or, the manipulation.
There are no actual tutors in the classroom, GSX.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that had to hurt somebody, right?
Yeah, Kurt, it hurt. All right. Thanks for bringing it up.
So, you brought it up. I didn't.
Whatever.
You brought it up. Listen.
What am I going to do? Blame myself? In this case, I'm a bag holder. I have every right to blame everybody. That's what bag holders do.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. Look, we've all had different stocks that have just, ruined us, whether it was ruined us for good or ruined us for some period of time. And it's, we went through the same thing. I mean, even now, I mean, look, if you ended up short of solar stock, 7 or 8 months ago, like they're all up 4 times.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, and I don't know whether, I haven't spent a lot of time on the solar business, but I mean, since the 80s, but I did spend some time on a couple, and God, it's just remarkable to me that these things are now so valuable, some of them.
I mean, Elon Musk's the richest man in the world, so this is not a bizarre concept to me. So, I mean, I notionally think Tesla's a fine car, but the valuation of things these days is incredible, Kurt. I mean, last year, the most successful short sellers, say maybe other than Carson, were net long the entire year, by very net long for the entire year. Otherwise, they were down. And that's the market we're in. Now, when that turns, it's going to be really, really bad for retail, I believe. Banks will survive. They always survive. And when they don't, we bail them out. But there are some people who are really going to lose a lot of money and figure out that 2008 was not that long ago.
Right. It's true. I mean, it really wasn't. And, you can go back and, look, I've been through the 87 crash, the 89 recession,
Black Monday, 1987.
Yeah. Black Monday. I mean, so you saw this crash, that crash, the crash last year, the crash in 08 or 07, or pick whatever dates are applicable. There's going to be another one. I mean, whether it's next year or this year, I don't know, but some of the valuations are rough to understand. Like I can't get my mind wrapped around it.
Yeah. Don't try.
In a lot of cases.
Yeah. Don't try. I won't. You just got to find that differentiated information that I mean, proves fraud or material misrepresentation, because not much else matters these days on the short side of it. That's just my opinion if you're going to be in the short game. Now, talking about 2008, that was kind of your Waterloo, wasn't it? That was like kind of, you were very bearish on Wells Fargo, as you should have been. They earned that. And then Warren Buffett came in and saved them. And I guess that was a killer for you, right?
Well, not in a weird way, Dan. Not really like what what's been written or talked about, you have to realize we started, I don't remember the exact prices, but let's say we started with Wells Fargo in the 60s or 70s price-wise. Mm-hmm. And it was a much smaller bank then, and the stock went into the teens. Mm-hmm. I actually gave a talk in San Francisco, and people made fun of it because whenever a short seller shows up at some analyst talk day, that's usually the bottom or the top. And I was there when the stock actually did bottom, but the stock went down 30, 40 points. Maybe because they had bad real estate, and then they took a big write down, and it did go up, and we covered. So we covered up 50% from the year end mark. And I would bet overall, like I don't have the books and I can't prove it, but I don't really even think we lost money in Wells Fargo.
Well,
I think we probably overall.
Why is it reported that you did?
Because people like to look. I mean, Robert Flaherty, Ray Dirks, Shortbusters. I mean, all these guys were just rooting for us to fail. And
so you made money on Wells Fargo. So you made money on Wells Fargo. So there. How about that?
Right.
Well, that's that's a scoop for us here. We should put that on your Wikipedia page.
I think we did make money in Wells Fargo. I may have to call somebody to double check, but I'll call my old partner. But I'm pretty sure we made money in Wells Fargo. It's like, look, we were short Citicorp back then. We made money in that. Mm-hmm. We made money in most all of the banks. We stayed with them too long because the Fed started cutting rates so much. But anyway.
No, I love that you did mention in there that these banks, including Wells Fargo, were much smaller back then. And back then you mean 2008 and 9, because the whole part of saving them was they were too big to fail, and we're going to fix that. And now they're all bigger by a multiple factor. Combined, they're bigger than countries, maybe even ours. So what do you think of that?
Gosh, I really hadn't thought of it that way, but it really wasn't 08 or 09 that we were talking about where people poke fingers at us for losing money in Wells. It was really in 91 where people said we lost money in Wells Fargo, Dan.
Oh, I thought I saw somewhere where they say Warren Buffett came in and bailed them out, which would have been the 08 crisis.
Well, I think he owned Wells Fargo back in the 90s.
That's where I got confused.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But, there was this is funny because you hung up on Warren Buffett, but there was a campaign not started by us.
I did hang up on him.
By the Feshbachs or Tom, but it was there were T-shirts around that said, fuck Warren Buffett, short Wells Fargo.
Wow. Wow.
That was not us, but on the other hand, it was pretty funny.
I would have done the second part of that, but I'm not sure I would have banged Warren Buffett. But
right.
Yeah.
Wow. Anyway, so no, it wasn't in 08. It was much earlier. It was, look, we're talking about things that happened a long time ago, and I use the same tactic.
Yeah, I'm glad you cleared that up because one, I had my times wrong, and two, I'm glad to hear you guys made money. So there you go.
No, we did. I mean, I read a book one day, and this guy, we were mentioned in the book, and stupid Feshbach Brothers and how stupid they were, and I don't even remember the book, and look what happened to them in Wells Fargo, and I'm like, you never called us, you never did a fact check. We made money in this stock. There's a problem. If a stock goes from 70 to 20 to 30, right? Yeah. And it goes from 70 to 20 in December, it's 20. And then in January or February, it's 30. Well, you're down 50% in the stock for the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so tell me,
that's
Kurt,
the hedge fund business.
Tell me, how did it wind up for your fund? I mean, you're looking at managing $1 billion in the early 90s, late 80s. That is a shit ton of money back then. What happened? What happened from there?
Well, there were a couple of things, Dan, and one. Well, the first thing there was the Fed started cutting rates at the end of in 90. The banks started making more money. We were short a fair amount of banks, and they went up. But most of the stocks that we were short were pretty crappy companies, right? Frauds and just stupid businesses and whatever. But many of them went up at the beginning of 91. There was like this massive short squeeze, like not as massive as, say, what happened with GameStop. Stocks weren't going up 10, 20, 30, 50 times, or when Volkswagen, when that short squeeze happened. But, many of our stocks went up, I would say, at least 2 or 3 times. And we went into 91, we were maybe 70% invested, and the market really took off in January, and we were, what's the right word? We were actually positioned pretty well, except we'd been through it every year, right? Stocks rallied in January, February, March, and then they would calm down a little bit in April and May. And, we would make money 2 or 3 months out of the year towards the end of the year. July, August, September, October, you had the October crash and things like that. But the stocks went up so fast that we did get squeezed out of a number of just frauds and different names, and even in some of the banks that we were short, we actually had to cover, like Wells Fargo, because they were taking these big write-offs. I mean, back then I think Wells Fargo took a $2 or $3 billion write-off, and was up that day, and that was pretty much the telltale sign. We had another thing, and I don't, we'll talk about this a little bit, Dan, but there was also an SEC investigation into us back then.
Yeah, you sued the SEC. I was going to ask you about that.
Right. There was this SEC investigation. It was on insider trading, and it really put us on our heels. I'll be honest. Mm-hmm. We had done nothing wrong, and we never, they never brought charges, and we didn't sign any consent decrees, and they eventually just went away. But there was a lot of shoot first, ask question later by the investors. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of our money just left at the same time we were getting squeezed. And it, when I say left, people were withdrawing because, they didn't want to be part of, some kind of Ivan Boesky type of a situation, right? That
mattered a lot more back then. I mean, did you get a Wells notice during this whole thing? I don't think I read that. No, nothing. In fact, I'll tell you. You didn't even get a Wells notice.
No, we never. They showed up at our office on a Friday afternoon at like 5 o'clock, and it was a guy named Gladwin Goins and his crew of SEC guys. There were like 11 or 12 of them, and they came with subpoenas, and we had to call our lawyers, and what do we do? And it was just like Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. Like he's just a press hound, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no more than that. Just complete joke. Like. It just, luckily I happened to be there. I mean, you got to remember we were in California, market closed at 1.
Oh.
What was I doing there at 5 except I was working? Right.
Yeah.
So they come in, they took all our files. We probably had 15,000, 20,000 pages and thousands of files on companies, and they deposed all of our analysts, and they had come to the conclusion we were literally paying people with checks. This is how stupid they thought we were. We were paying company management with checks written from Feshbach Brothers to get inside information. So completely insane. Like, wouldn't you take a bag of cash?
Well, I wouldn't do either, but yeah, sure, I guess.
Anyway, but that was kind of part of the allegation. But really, and this is even where you get into naked shorting and things like that, like how stupid that whole concept has been over time.
Yeah.
In my opinion. And so what happened was I was the last one of us. I think I was the last one. I was certainly the last one in California to be deposed. And, and they brought up two stocks. One was a kidney stone stock, and I don't actually remember the name of it, and I couldn't find it, but it was early on in the 80s, or late 80s, where this machine would rattle your kidney to get to break down the kidney stone. But it didn't really work. I think
could use it.
No, Carl. That's lithotripsy. That's they use sound vibration now that actually works. What he's talking about didn't work and was probably very unhealthy for you.
Right. And it wasn't sound vibrations. I don't remember what the vibrations were, but it rocked your kidneys, right?
Yeah.
It was a complete fraud.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they asked about that stock, and I made fun of them in this deposition. And then the next thing they bring up is a company that we were short called Golden Valley Microwave. ConAgra bought it, and ConAgra bought it and closed it within 6 months of having bought it because it was a fraud, and they didn't really have sales, and the product wasn't very good. It was microwave popcorn, but the analyst that worked on the stock was a really smart guy, Mike, and he figured out, from talking to scientists or whoever, that the outer core of the thing the packaging over that pops up when you microwave something would leak into the popcorn. So you were eating aluminum foil or whatever that stuff was, right?
Yeah, or whatever Dow Chemical makes. I would say it's a PFAS.
Right. Anyway, I'm digressing, but it was a joke. It was a complete joke. So we were short this stock. We were short the stock in a couple places, at Merrill, at Lehman. We always borrowed stock. We actually kept our stock loan ledgers so anybody could see, date, time, borrowed, who the stock loan guy was, what firm, whatever, right? It was a complete ledger of everything we did stock loan wise. So we were getting bought in on this stock and on this Golden Valley Microwave. And so it was 150,000 shares. We were getting bought in, and we found stock at Oppenheimer or Lehman or somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. And we shorted it from Lehman to Merrill, call it, whoever we shorted it to. And, it went, and we were still short. They throw that, but then like literally 2 days later, the stock gets bought out. And the SEC only sees one half of the ticket. They see the buy. You tracking with me?
Yeah, because it got bought out.
And they see the buy, and they don't see the sell. And, the short from the other side. And so they thought we had gotten inside information and covered, and we had a big position in this stock. We were short 400,000 or 500,000 shares. They thought we'd covered a third of it. Yeah. Not all of it, just a third of it, right? Like if we had inside information, you would think that we would have covered it all. But instead, we had the exact same position 2 days later when it was bought out. So they shoved this ticket in front of me and say, what about this? What about Golden Valley Microwave? You bought this 2 days before this, before the purchase was announced. And I jumped out of my chair. My lawyer was there, and I started screaming at these people about how stupid they are.
That's always helpful.
And what bullshit
at the SEC.
Yeah. And what bullshit they put us through over nothing, literally nothing. A fraud and a purchase, but they missed the sale. And that they had thought, that was what they were going to get us on. Golden Valley Microwave, insider trading, 2 days before the acquisition. Mm-hmm. Never heard from them again after my deposition. Well, that was the absolute end.
But then you sued them.
Yeah, but nothing came of it.
That is what happens when you sue the SEC, even if they're wrong. I mean, that's just kind of the way it goes.
Yeah.
And, it's funny because, I was starting to say earlier, you talk about, you didn't even get a Wells notice, right? So there's an investigation that's publicly announced, and you start losing investors left and right, as would happen in the late 80s, 90s of the Boesky, Milken era. Now I talked to somebody, last year that did have a Wells notice and, is under investigation. And I'm like, oh, man, but, geez, what did that do to your investors and your fund? He had an inflow of investors.
Right.
Well, I guess they think that, all of this at worst is nobody admits fault and you pay a fine. I mean, which, my last guest, Jordan Thomas would say, and he worked for the SEC, and I agree with him that, like, you know what? You just need to walk uphill and fight those battles at the SEC anymore, and maybe stop with all of the, hey, we'll just all go our separate ways for the bag of money you were talking about, Kurt. Really, that's what it kind of comes down to. And yeah, I bet that really killed you with investors.
It did. It was really the thing that killed us.
Oh.
I mean, it was just brutal. And anyway, but that's kind of how things wrapped up. And I like the 20,000 to 30,000 documents they took out of your office. I would love to see somebody do an exercise, and if it was possible, and see how many investigations the SEC got against companies going through all of your documents, because that's pre-whistleblower program, right? They've got all this rich treasure trove of documents about, some of these are speeding tickets, SEC violations, but that's how they make money. So if you read all of what you had and they went after these companies for some speeding tickets and maybe some big violations, I bet they made some real money off that. Right. Oh, they may have. I don't know. We'd given them so many names and could never understand why they were treating us like an enemy. I mean, we weren't friends, right? But we'd given them, I mean, you saw a good portion, some portion of a list of names that had been turned over to them and the DOJ. And, we wasn't like we were, going after whatever. I mean, nobody said Wells Fargo was a fraud. All we said was, they've got terrible real estate and their loans are bad. And we had a history in S&Ls and different things. But the great capping, one of the great caps on the story that, sort of a stupid victory, was the guy that was in charge of it was a guy that started it all, who was making calls to people and, called Herb Greenberg, and was a guy named Gladwin Goines. And Gladwin Goines was eventually
that couldn't have been easy.
Implicated in
his name. It couldn't have been easy, but go ahead.
Yeah, as was his name, Gladwin with a Y, Goines, Goins. Anyway, the hedge fund he worked for was a Ponzi scheme.
There you go. So, Gladwin Goines, you got it. Yep. And by the way, if you went to my high school, Gladwin, you'd have gotten your ass beat just on the Goines thing. So, yeah, the regulators, look, the SEC gets it right most of the time. And no, you're right. They don't have friends. Like anybody on the other side of the table, long, short, or otherwise, whether you're presenting evidence or, in your case, being suspected of something, it's all really about making a case, right? So people have said to me, when you go to the SEC with this lock solid fraud out of China and you've got all this film and this whatever, that's a great day for the SEC. And, the answer really is it's a good day. A great day is when I've done that and I've made a mistake too, because they get 2 cases for 1. And that's their job.
Right.
But every once in a while, yeah, you can run into a hostile regulator, whether it's there or the DOJ or anywhere else that's got this beef. I'm glad that Goines got his comeuppance, but at the end of the day, the sad truth is it absolutely ruined your business. That was a thriving business, I think, doing a public service.
Yeah. Well, we that was our whole job. And, look, by 91, a lot of, what's his name was gone. Belfort was gone, and D.H. Blair was gone, and a bunch of these small brokerage firms were gone, but a lot of them, lived on, and, there's still the, same schlocky stuff they kind of bring. It's not always dead frauds like, what Belfort did, but at Stratton Oakmont. But, it was, there's still tons of stuff you can do and lots of things you can look at. And
that's what we're doing. And and when I say we're doing, I mean you're doing it too. So, I mean, I guess, heading towards getting to the end of a conversation, how long do you have it for? I mean, like you just keep going. Out of all the players that were involved in the early 80s, here you are still doing short side research. What's the plan for you over the next 1, 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, let's hope I can stay alive.
That's step one. Stay alive.
That's kind of the first goal. First goal is to kind of stay alive. But I'm like excited to work. I'm excited to dig into these companies. I've got working with a guy on this Bindle Paper thing he's a great guy, and I think I can keep going for 10 or 15 years and keep doing this. And, hopefully I can bring in 1 or 2 people and train them and, help them learn sort of this art of short selling and find some good stuff. But I love doing this, and I'm really lucky from that standpoint, right? No college, no real high school, and but it's just fun. I mean, I still find, frustrating, of course, and all the other adjectives you want to put with it. But isn't it fun to just dig stuff up? Isn't that just like the greatest job that you could ever want?
People think it's a very corny thing. And especially other short sellers would say, like, anybody says they're not in it for the money, they're lying. Well, look, we're all doing our jobs for money. What I like most about our job and mine, yes, digging, hunting, pecking, and getting to the end of a thesis and being correct. But at the end of the day, all I have to do is tell the truth for a living. Like, where can you work where your job is basically to tell the truth for a living? That's what you do. You don't have to couch it. You can just say, this is my truth. You don't like it? Go screw yourself. I worked for a publicly listed company for many years, and they're a great company, great people, very honorable, and I enjoyed that job. But it wasn't just telling the truth all day, right? I mean, you're just, you're navigating the corporate structure, and, there's the pecking order, and there's this or there's that. But, for us, that's what I like the most. Yeah.
So, it's fun. You try and find out what...
And the money's great, too.
It's still fun. I still have a lot of fun. I like it. And, do I get frustrated or whatever? But that's not even the point. The point is not many people get to do stuff that they really like for a long time. And I've done it for a long time and still really like it. So that's good. Hey.
Yeah, you're hitting 40 years.
Yeah. I'm going to be 69 in 3 months.
Oh, congratulations.
Almost 70.
Congratulations. Well, look, Kurt, I've talked to you, I don't know, maybe a handful of times over the past 10 years. Not enough. And I've always come away from that conversation, man, this guy is really interesting. And I know I haven't even scratched the surface of some of the frauds that you've investigated and some of the techniques that you've used, some of the great stories that you have. And, I'd like to have you back at some point, maybe on a shorter form where we can just talk 2 or 3 old frauds that are very much like a fraud that's captured today. Like when you see one out there, Kurt, that says, you know what? This is a repeat of this company in 1986, and this is why it's a repeat. I think that would be an interesting story of how the fraud in our markets just continues to repeat itself.
Would love to. I think that'd be a fun conversation, Dan. Really fun.
Well, that's great. No,
because I think it really does happen.
Yeah, I do too. So do you have anything you want to add? Do you want to tell us about anything? You want to talk any more about Bindle? Anything else you want to talk about?
Well, Bindle is just, it's deep-seated research. It's a very exciting new product. It's a subscription, and I'm hoping people like the research, and it's deep-seated research and bigger companies. Very excited, and hope some funds call and I can have a few subscribers. I'm not looking to have 100 or 50, but I could have 10, 15, or 20, that'd be great. The research keeps me young and,
There you go.
well, sort of young. I'm pretty old, but, whatever. So that's really it.
So how do people follow you? How do people find you? How do clients get a hold of you to buy your research?
Well, I've got my Twitter account. I've got LinkedIn. They can contact me through either one.
What's your Twitter handle?
Kurt Feshbach. It's just my name. I'm not hidden or
Okay,
anything.
so you are at Kurt Feshbach.
Got my picture.
Okay, well, wonderful, wonderful. You're at Kurt Feshbach. You're on LinkedIn. That's how people can get a hold of you. Come back and hear us for our next show. I think Kurt was fantastic and
Amazing.
Yeah. Carl thinks he was amazing. When's the last time Carl has said that? There you go. Thanks for
Probably your last guest.
not on the show actually, but he did think Jordan was pretty great. So thanks for joining us, and look forward to talking to you again soon. I wish you the best, and be well, Kurt. And to our listeners, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, leave us a comment, give us a retweet, follow us on Twitter. Thanks for joining us.